Hi, Dale Tice here with today's 2-minute bass lesson. Had a great email question about how to set up a practice routine. And I got to tell you, over my years of playing, that was an early on challenge for me. I found that when I sat down excited to practice, I ended up playing all the stuff I already knew how to play. I wasn't growing as a player and expanding my vocabulary. I was just getting better at what I could already do. And then when I went to Musicians Institute and studied at the Bass Institute of Technology, they have a ton of guys who could sit down and say, okay, here's how you should really practice. And it's funny, I had been somewhat successful as a bass player before going there, but I had never had anyone teach me how to learn, which is really funny. So I became really infatuated with that and tweaking my practice routines. One of the services I offer my private students is I help them set up a practice schedule and a practice routine. Now, what is a practice routine? It basically is an organized way to go through and make sure you're covering all the elements that you feel are important for you to develop as the type of player you want to be. Now, why do I say it that way? It's because some people, if they want to be session players, they go, man, I really want to just go in and play with a wide variety of people and do recording sessions and be the best in that. Well, then there's certain tools you'll have to have. Sight reading, ear training, be versed in many techniques, have great groove, excellent clean technique, things like that. If you are like, boy, I want to be the best death metal bass player in the world, well, maybe reading isn't as important for your practice routine at that point, but other aspects are, including, as I'm learning, as I get to know more players in that genre, a lot of gear and working with tone and working with your actual physical elements you're playing. So, first of all, before you set up a routine, you have to kind of answer that question, what kind of player do I want to be? Now, if you're early on in your journey and you're not sure, then I encourage you just to really approach all the elements. I'm going to just use an example of a practice journal I set up for one of my students. This will be, as an example, will be uploaded onto the MTD Kingston site. If you go to the Zone, which is a section in the menu bar, go to Bass Lessons, and this will be under the Written Materials column. So let me kind of read how I've set it up. Now, this is called a practice journal. The routine is what you practice in what order and what topics you cover. But it's also not going to be as an effective tool unless you can track it and really be focused and well planned out in your strategy. This will keep you from wasting time. If you only have, a lot of us are real busy and we might have 30 minutes that we can dedicate to practicing. So you'll sit down and if you waste time going, oh, what am I going to do? And if there's lulls, then you have a tendency to start just jamming on stuff you already know how to do. So that can be a pain in the butt too. So for this particular player, a student of mine, he was studying both electric bass and upright bass. And his goal was, he loved jazz, and his goal was to go to a higher education school, maybe a conservatory, and then later tour as a jazz bassist. So you're going to see that his elements are skewed to that way. So first thing I always do with the practice journal is I put the date on it. And it's important for you to track that, okay, that you can go back and see what days you practiced and on what days you were doing what. Now, I'm going to first just go through the first column here, which is the topics. And I'll just read off so you get an idea what a practice journal can look like. So for him, it started with rhythmic reading and melodic reading. He divided, I thought it was best for his. He was a pretty upper level reader, so I was giving him really intense rhythm exercises. One note, like the middle C, but really crazy syncopations and odd groupings that you would never see probably in music that he'd be hired to play. And then melodic reading, making sure he could read all over his bass and do large interval leaps and things that didn't make melodic sense, but he could still do it. Next for him was technique. And you'll notice in the absolute first column there's just numbers, and those are minutes. So like rhythmic reading 10 minutes, melodic reading 10 minutes, technique 10 minutes. Chord theory 5 minutes, scale theory 5 minutes, improv 15 minutes, jazz song study 15 minutes. Then he'd switch to his acoustic bass, and he would usually not do these in a row. He'd do like electric in the morning, acoustic at night, because he was actually going to college at the same time. And then he'd do 10 minutes of rhythmic reading on the upright, 10 minutes of melodic on the upright, 5 minutes of technique, 5 minutes of chord theory, scale theory 5 minutes, 15 minutes jazz studies, 10 minutes classical studies, because he was actually performing with a classical orchestra playing upright, and then 10 minutes of styles. Now you'll see another box down here, a table down here, it says extra studies, because he wanted to develop his ability to transcribe, so there was transcription for 30 minutes, and he was working with a software program called Finale. and he wanted 30 minutes of that. So he basically looked, if you add it up, he wanted about around an hour on the electric, around an hour on the upright, and around an hour on these extra studies. And then there's a column down here, notes for next study, practice. So that if you like say, oh, I finished this book off, or I want to transcribe this song next time, this is where you can remind yourself, just in case there's a couple days between practice, where you left off or key elements. Now all these other columns, resource. Let's just use an example, rhythmic reading. The resource might be a book you bought. There's a lot of great drum books that offers, killer rhythmic readings. Louis Bellson has reading in 4/4 and reading in odd meters. Joel Rothman, I believe it is, has a reading book for drummers that you could read. So you might want to put that book title there. Then it says start. Now, start and stop is not time. I put that as metronome markings. So that say you pick a rhythmic reading exercise and you can read it pretty well at 60 beats per minute. You want to try to get that to higher tempos, not to be fast and a speed demon, but when reading, higher tempos improves your focus. So you might say, okay, I started in this 10-minute rhythm reading phase, I started at 60 beats per minute, and I was able to read this book on this page up to 80 beats. I read it 3 times and went 10 beats up at a time. And then you have a notes section, just quick notes. Things like, oh, I didn't do it very well, but should start at 60 again. Things like that will help you stay on track and not waste time. Now you can make your own just using Excel, or heck, you know what, in my early days I just bought a binder and put some binder paper in it, and I hand wrote these things out. If you want to have any help putting together your practice routine, go ahead and email me. That'd be a really valid way to kind of maybe get another person's perspective. Before you do, find out what you want to accomplish. Do you want to go on to another source of education? You want to go to Musicians Institute, Berkeley, North Texas State, any of the great music schools and academies out there? Do you want to tour as a rock player? And it would also help me if you could kind of self-analyze what are your greatest problems. What's the biggest obstacles in your way? Because then I can skew that. And then kind of tell me what you think you can dedicate time-wise. Now you notice there's a lot of sections there that are 5 minutes. Some people say 5 minutes, oh that's ridiculous, I'm going to practice an hour on that. Well, the problem is if you're trying to cover 5 or 6 topics and you practice an hour on the first one, you're going to burn out and not really give all the other topics that follow it your full attention. I don't know many people that can. Now we can all play for 8 hours, but whether we can study and learn and really imprint that data on our mind for that long, there's a lot of doubt about that. I would rather see my students cover a topic for 5 to 10 minutes, but do it every single day, or 5 days out of the week, take a couple days off. The biggest thing is get a practice routine that's encouraging and that you don't burn out on. And if you find yourself burning out on it, change it up. Change the order. Just don't start with things that are physically demanding. You want to start with some kind of warm-up. He preferred to start with reading as a warm-up and then go to technique, which is totally valid. Or I've seen guys set up where they want to do their technique warm-ups first and then go into reading. So this is kind of a longer lesson, and I apologize for that, but I think it's important. I think set up a practice routine and keeping a journal will help you consistently improve instead of getting on these plateaus that annoy us all. So if you have any questions about this and you need help setting up your own practice routine, please email me at dalet@danielbgoods.com. Thanks a lot.